this kind of came out of left field in a lot of ways. You knew the pitching had been struggling. That wasn't a surprise. I mean, it may have been a surprise, but when the Contreras stuff all comes to a head over the weekend, you could go, all right, I can connect those dots. The pitching has struggled. They might be looking for a scapegoat. There might be a lack of comfort there, something going on as it pertains to Willson Contreras. And the breadcrumbs were kind of there over the past week, too, as you saw more Andrew Knizner starts. And Ollie Marmol tried to say it was because of him facing left-handed pitching. They like the matchups against lefties, which may have been true. More of the Knizner starts prior to the past week had come against lefty starters. So there might have been a little bit of validity to that. But clearly there was something else going on, and I still don't think we're to the bottom of it. I still don't know if we'll ever find out exactly the genesis of this conversation and why the Cardinals have made this drastic move just more than a month into a 5-year contract with Willson Contreras, that they have basically benched him from the catching position for the time being. It's kind of an indefinite situation, but also one that, at least, especially the way they talked about it on the broadcast tonight, they're looking to turn it around, and Willson at least believes he's going to be back behind the plate soon. If you saw some of the quotes flying around from guys like Adam Wainwright this afternoon, he said he'd be happy to have Willson Contreras catch him in his next start. So kind of a mixed bag of questions and understanding of what's going on with that whole deal. But it did take me by surprise. And I thought when that was all coming out over the weekend, it came out in little chunks and none of it made sense to me. From the very beginning, it was like, okay, he's not going to be the catcher. And you look at it and go, okay, Knizner is caught a little bit more frequently. Something's got to be going on here behind the scenes. And the Cardinals pitching has struggled. And so is it a case where the Cardinals pitching staff is just, for whatever reason, not on the same page, lacking that comfort right now with Contreras, the new catcher? Like, we've talked about these things on the stream before, the notion that, hey, they're used to Yadier Molina. This guy comes in and is a veteran in his own right. He's done it before at the major league level. World Series catcher in 2016, right? Like, he was part of that team. It's not like he's brand new to this, but the expectations, being on the same page, just understanding how the pitchers in St. Louis like to do things. Maybe there's a learning curve there. We talked about how it might not happen overnight, that the chemistry would develop so quickly, which is why it was so important, I thought, that Willson Contreras decides to forego the World Baseball Classic and make sure he's there in spring training with the Cardinals down in Jupiter for the entire time, so that he's able to maximize his opportunities and his chances to grow and mesh with the pitching for this team. And so that's what he did. And yet we're still in this situation where the Cardinals feel like the only option they have at this point is to take Contreras out of the equation, at least for a little while, behind the plate. And that's a drastic move. I think that's the bottom line of this, is no matter what it is and what the reason behind it is, like, it probably doesn't happen if the Cardinals aren't 11-24, now they're 12-24. Like, if the Cardinals aren't dreadful in the standings to begin the season, it's one of those things where, yeah, Jordan Walker probably doesn't get sent down. They just let him work through things. And even though you might have a few too many outfielders for daily spots, it's not the end of the world. The vibes are strong, so let's keep it the same. Maybe that's what would have happened as well with this Contreras situation, where you say, well, the pitching may not be maximized right now, but if we're not losing games, maybe we don't do anything about it. But the Cardinals have been losing a lot of games, and they felt like, I've talked about DEFCON 1. That's where I have been on this Cardinals season. And they felt like maybe a reactionary move, or a move that happens without waiting any further for things to go even more down a path that's not productive. They felt like it was time right now to make a move like that. But isn't the way that this comes off is like Contreras is the big-time scapegoat for everything that's been going on. Willson Contreras did not and does not call for instance, Cardinals pitching to throw 2-strike pitches right over the middle of the plate. He might call for a curveball, but he doesn't call for a curveball hanging in the upper third of the strike zone, dead red in the middle for Luis Rengifo, that Jack Flaherty throws it right over there and allows a 3-run home run. We talked about that Rengifo play the other day. There was no other option than to hit that ball over the wall. It was a hanger in every sense of the word. So at what point is the execution of the pitchers making these pitches happen an important factor in this as well? Or is it just, well, he doesn't do things we don't like? Like, it's all very vague, right? We don't even really know specifically what the issue is, Because you look at everything that's come out, and Ollie Marmol has said, I want to be very clear. This is a quote from, I think it was yesterday, maybe 2 days ago. I want to be clear. Willson Contreras is not the reason we're losing games. Willson catching is not the reason. He's not the problem. Okay, then why? You see where that doesn't really add up with this significant move, that decision that's being made about a catcher who you have devoted $87.5 million to. You've committed that over the next 5 years, and you're a month into this situation. It's a little strange, right? And so Moore comes out and says, well, they're going to put him at DH and they're going to put him in the outfield. The Cardinals say, I think that came from Ollie Marmol, where he's going to get some time in the outfield. And that's the point at which I looked at this and I was like, this is insane. This is crazier than I thought it could possibly get. Because did the Cardinals not just have a situation a couple weeks ago where they had to send down their top prospect, who is an outfielder, because of how crowded the outfield was? Did they forget that was the situation they were living in? I understand that Tyler O'Neill is on the injured list right now, and so at least for the next couple of weeks, that clears up an additional spot that you wouldn't have otherwise had, and you thought, well, maybe we could throw him out there. It took the Cardinals all of a day to retract that and go, well, no, he's actually not going to play in the outfield. If you needed any more proof that they're making it up as they go along, what else are you looking for? Because that's all the evidence I need that maybe they're not on top of this thing in its entirety. And I think that's true going all the way back to before they signed him. Remember how much was made of the December meeting down in Florida between John Mozeliak and Willson Contreras and the other Cardinals brass that were there. I believe Ollie Marmol was there, but there were a few Cardinals brass, and it was like a job interview, essentially. We're going to look to sign this guy. Is this the move that we want to make as an organization? And they had the opportunity to get to know Contreras, get to know all that he was about, and presumably express some of the expectations the Cardinals had for what it would mean to have him as the catcher of the Cardinals and what that might look like from an expectation standpoint. And now we're hearing things within the last couple of days where John Mozeliak says they need to get Willson Contreras and the Cardinals on the same page of what they expect from the catcher position for the Cardinals. That's not what we heard in December, right? Or whenever that meeting, I think it was December. That is not the language that we were expecting to hear a month into the season based on everything they had said, which was, oh yeah, it went great. They were reassured by the meeting. It's crazy how there can be such a lack of communication. It boggles the mind that the Cardinals can have one thing in mind, come away from the meeting thinking, oh, we've got our guy, and then a month later, 5 weeks later, it's a completely different situation. Now, again, I think it's reactionary because if you're at 500 right now, it's probably not the end of the world to have some growing pains with a new catcher. It's not as noticeable necessarily. But when as many pitchers as they've had have been struggling, and I don't know for a fact that this is what took place, but I have to figure that at some point along the line, there were pitchers that said to Mozeliak, Marmol, somebody with the Cardinals, like, hey, this stuff with Willson, something's not right. Something's not what it needs to be. And you think through that list and you go, okay, Adam Wainwright hasn't pitched to Willson Contreras this year because he's been on the injured list. And then Kisner caught his one start over the weekend as this was all kind of coming to a head on Saturday morning. So, all right. Miles Michaelis has, seen some more Kisner, but Contreras has caught him. Montgomery, has been caught by Contreras, but Montgomery has kind of been their one productive starter this year outside of one or two outings. He's been pretty good. Matz has really struggled, but that was true of Matz last year. And then Jake Woodford, he's started for a while, but now he's out of the rotation in favor of Wainwright. So, you kind of go through it and you're like, I don't really know what dots need to be connected, and maybe it doesn't matter. But clearly somewhere along the way, the Cardinals were like, yes, there's validity to this because we're going to act upon it by saying we're going to sideline Contreras and try and work on some things behind the scenes so that he can get up and ready. And here's another weird part of this. The natural inclination would be, is Contreras not working hard enough? Is he not doing enough to prepare? And Marmol completely rejects that. In multiple different quotes that I have seen, says, no, it's nothing about his work ethic, and he's working hard, and he's doing all the right things. Okay, what is it? Nobody knows. It's impossible to figure it out, and they're not really saying much. So I have no idea. We can speculate. It's fun to do so, but it's become kind of a national laughingstock in a lot of ways, where this becomes something that, Ken Rosenthal writing about it at The Athletic, and that was where John Mozeliak makes his quotes, right? To The Athletic. Didn't have from what I understand, any sort of media, scrum or anything like that in St. Louis over the weekend. Um, you know, Repeatedly, reporters were trying to figure out through Marmol and those conversations what was going on, but nobody really seemed to. It's just very strange. It's very strange. And there's not, and like the Cardinals have said, it may not make sense right now. And I saw a quote, I think John Denton put that out, that it may not make sense right now. And, but in the long run, we think this is what's best and what needs to happen. And so that's kind of one of those things where, yeah, the speculation is going to run rampant because they're not saying anything. It's very vague. We're not really getting an understanding of why this move was made in the first place, other than, something's amiss, something's awry behind the scenes between the Cardinals pitching staff and the way Contreras has gone about it. Or it's even hard to pinpoint exactly where it's gone south, other than you can look at the results, and the results have been poor. But I think about the results and think about the fact that Contreras said, well, he had a FaceTime with Yadier Molina, and Yadi said, yeah, it's the pitcher's not executing in 2-strike counts. No kidding, it's not. Exactly. So I just don't really understand where that is something that Contreras takes the blame for. Jack Flaherty, in his quote, one of his quotes after his last start where he gave up 10 runs, and that was about 5 days ago because he's starting Tuesday now. But Flaherty was awful in that outing, and the 2-strike counts came back to bite him majorly. But he said, as a staff, we're throwing terrible pitches that don't make sense. And so you're like, well, is that a criticism of Contreras, or is that just a realization? As Flaherty said, I didn't get pulled from the game because of my forearm getting hit by a comebacker. I got pulled from the game because I sucked. And so is he just taking responsibility there on behalf of the entire staff and saying, we didn't do what we would need to do in these 2-strike counts, and we're throwing pitches that don't make sense? Or is that a criticism of the pitches that are being called? Hard to really say. And another aspect of this is PitchCom exists now. So you as the Cardinals are going to pin all of this on the guy calling the pitches, when in reality, I don't know what the process would be, like the application process to say, I'm going to be a pitcher that calls my own pitches. But I would imagine that there are some veterans on this Cardinals staff that have been doing this for long enough that theoretically they could. I don't know if that's been broached. I imagine it's come up, but I haven't seen what the Cardinals have said about it, if they've been asked about it. It's just another aspect of this that you look at and go, is it pitch calling? Is it just looking for a scapegoat because the execution has been so poor in those situations? It's really hard to get down to the nitty-gritty of what it is. And it could be so many things and a combination of things at this point. And I sort of got a theory about, for the Cardinals and for John Mozeliak and company, this is like their come to Jesus moment of, they have said for years and talked ad nauseum about how great Yadier Molina was and how vital to their success Yadier Molina was, and all of these wonderful, very legitimate praise quotes that you would get about Yadi over the years. And it's like, did they forget they said all of them? Because if you're going to praise Yadi for how great he was and how integral he was to managing things and handling the staff and all of those things, would it not stand to reason that when you end up with another catcher that isn't Yadi, that it's not just going to be a smooth transition that happens overnight automatically? It's either they were just blowing smoke the whole time about Yadi and they didn't actually think those things that they were saying, and they just said them because they sounded nice, or the things they said about Yadi were very true, and they almost only knew the tip of the iceberg about all the work that he put in and how important it truly was. They could say it and say it and say it, but it's not until he's gone and somebody else, doesn't matter who it is, it happens to be a 6-year, 7-year veteran of Major League Baseball that's done this at a high level. But would it even matter if it's not Yadi and we didn't really fully grasp what we were asking of the guy we were bringing in? We didn't even fully understand or comprehend all of the things maybe that Yadier Molina did and the weight that he carried for the club year after year after year, the weight that he carried for the pitching staff. I think it's legitimately possible that the Cardinals didn't even realize. The reason that a month into it, they're already having to pivot and go back to the drawing board with Contreras before they send him back out there to be the catcher. It's like they maybe didn't even fully understand what they were asking Contreras to do, because so much of what Yadi did probably still flew under the radar, even for as great as everybody thought he was. That's kind of my running theory at this point. It's not groundbreaking by any means, but I just think, boy, has Yadi's Hall of Fame candidacy really ticked up in the last week. Like, is that crazy to say? I don't think it's crazy to say at all, because people are maybe gaining a newfound appreciation for a guy that they already thought very highly of. And again, that doesn't have to and shouldn't necessarily be a reflection of Willson Contreras as much as it is the Yadi era and the fact that the Cardinals, I don't even know if took it for granted is the right way to phrase it, because again, they were constantly praising Yadi for what he brought to the table. But it's almost, can you even know the full extent of it until there's another guy in that seat and you had a 3-hour meeting with him in Florida and he sounded really enthusiastic about filling the shoes, but then you get in there and you go, oh man, maybe I didn't fully understand what these guys wanted from me, which is why I would feel bad for Contreras, because it's like, what is he to do? He thinks he's doing, the things he's supposed to do. And again, there could be a smoking gun or there could be an explanation that comes out in 2 weeks or in a week or in a month or next year that adds context that's really important, that explains some of this and would render some of our speculation tonight moot, and would say, all right, we were barking up the wrong tree. That makes sense. But as of tonight, Monday, May 8th, 2023, we don't have it. We don't have that information, and so speculate we will.